perspectives on these thematic approaches. Um, the first slide, as you can see, is entitled Navigating the Emotional Geographies of Displacement. Now, while navigating the emotional geographies of displacement and the induced precarity, it is necessary, I believe, as a reader, as a researcher, to begin the inquiry by foregrounding a few questions. And I have enumerated the questions over here on this slide. Uh, so what I aim to do is each question I want to respond to these each questions while contextualizing the same on one or two narratives. So the first question that I have given here is, how do South Asian literary narratives enhance our understanding of migrant representation, vulnerability, and displaced identities? Now, displacement in South Asian literature is depicted as an existential crisis, one that fractures identity, reshapes social hierarchies, exposes individuals to legal and economic precarity. These narratives challenge the very simplistic notions of migration as either a triumph of resilience or a descent into victimhood. Instead, they offer a profoundly humanized perspective of the lived experiences of displacement. For instance, we were talking about Sanjeev Sahota's The Year of the Runaways, which was published in 2015, where we see that the characters, the three migrant characters, are exploited in the labor economy of UK, portraying how undocumented workers remain permanently vulnerable to deportation, workplace abuse, as well as racial exclusion. Now, the themes of statelessness, economic precarity, racial exclusion are replete in this narrative. Similarly, even Sharon Bala's The Boat People, which talks about legal precarity as well as statelessness, um, the novel depicts a group of Tamilian refugees from Sri Lanka trying to seek asylum in Canada, only to be detained and labeled as security threats. The bureaucratic process, as depicted here, is dehumanizing, showing how host nations often treat the displaced individuals as political problems rather than human beings. The themes of detention, post-colonial, and the bureaucratic migration policies, how they entrench the system and act as a perpetrator, uh, also are highlighted in this novel. Um, in the second, well, the second question is about what ways or how these texts depict the tensions between navigating uh, legal frameworks and maintaining an attachment with the homeland. Now, the displaced individuals, as we have seen, that they occupy a liminal space, a transitional space, a space that is characterized by ambiguity, nostalgia, a certain sense of unease. And they are always torn between rigid bureaucratic constraints as well as of the nation states, as well as the emotional attraction, the emotional pull of the homeland. And these texts further explore how the displaced must constantly negotiate their legality or illegality, as we call it in policy terms, cultural memory, as well as political allegiances. Again, harking back to Sharon Bala's The Boat People, we see that the Tamil refugees who were seeking asylum in Canada, the protagonist Mahindan is tries to prove his innocence over and over again in a legal system that already assumes that he is guilty. Now, Canadian asylum policies, or the asylum policies of or the refugee policies as designed by these developed nation states, reflect the legacy of post-colonial migration restrictions, where the former imperial nations still have the right to decide who deserves a safe harbor or refuge. The next question that I have posted here is, how do consciousness and autonomy shape refugee and migrant decision making? Now, these narratives often challenge the assumption that displaced individuals are passive victims. Instead, these narratives highlight that how they exercise their agency, even under often shaping their survival, even under extreme constraints. For example, Megha Majumdar's A Burning, a novel that was published in 2020, we see that Jivan, the protagonist, who is Muslim woman, is accused of terrorism, showing how the nation state often controls the narratives of citizenship and criminality. However, it is through her writings, she stages a protest, an act of resistance. And agency, in this case, individual agency, exists even within an ambience of oppression, and that is what Majumdar tries to depict. Similarly, also in Arundhati Roy's The Ministry of Utmost Happiness, um, there is the character Anjum. She chooses to create her own space of belonging despite being rejected by the society. So, what we see is that South Asian narratives reject the notion of migrants as being passive victims. Instead, they portray the migrants, or these displaced individuals, often as active agents who are shaping their own existence, who are shaping their own survival, their own predicament. Now, how do these South Asian literary narratives challenge the Western depiction of migration? Uh, Now, Western knowledge systems again have depicted displacement or migration as either people, individuals, or population groups as helpless victims or as cultural threats. Now, reinforcing some kind of new Orientalist stereotypes. In contrast, South Asian writers offer a more nuanced as well as self representational narratives that emphasize upon a political critique and historical depth. Going back to the Ministry of Utmost Happiness, the novel, of course, Roy rejects in her narrative the trope of refugee as a victim trope that is set by the Western knowledge system, and instead she portrays her characters as politically conscious and self-determined, who is ready to fight for their rights. Also, in both people, we see that. Migration, which in Western narratives is often depicted as an economic burden in Western even policy frameworks, Bala critiques how Western governments create and sustain this precarity, because they so South Asian authors, they just do not they just reject they simply reject the depictions of migrants as objects of pity. Instead, they portray them as political actors with complex histories. Now, these interrogations are necessary, as I said, in order to analyze or understand the displacement, the precarity, and the traumatic uh, atmosphere that is created within these narratives. Um, Now, discussing some of these contemporary novels, as we have already discussed yesterday, that displacement entails precarity. Now, it could be economic instability, it could be legal, social exclusion, or even political persecution. Now, the struggles of the undocumented migrants and asylum seekers, of course, they are, even though they are located in a host nation, they are still stateless. In their existence is not defined by the host nation. It is and is not recognized either. So, legal exclusion and statelessness and the struggles of the asylum seekers. Now, South Asians leave their we have seen that South Asians leave their homelands sometimes not by choice but out of necessity. It may be due to war or persecution or maybe an economic collapse. However, host countries frequently treat them as security threats rather than humans or rather than victims of these uh, conflicts, and often placing them in detentions or even deporting them. Uh, Both people highlights this, the limbo of the legal limbo of asylum seekers, when we see that the Tamil refugees who are fleeing a post-war Sri Lanka and are seeking refuge, are seeking a safe harbor in one of the developed nation states, Canada, are only to be detained. The Mahindan, the protagonist, arrives in Canada but is treated as a criminal. His refugee status is questioned and he's placed in detention. The novel further critiques how Western asylum systems are designed to reject, not protect the people, the asylum seekers. Bureaucratic loopholes ensure that these refugees permanently remain in a legal limbo for years. And even though the protagonist Mahindan physically escapes war from his homeland as he escapes, he still remains stateless and vulnerable because he's not uh, recognized citizenship, let alone citizenship. He's not even recognized as a human who who requires some kind of nation state protection, and he's also unable to return to his homeland. So he is again in that liminal space. He's inhabiting that liminal space, again, a space of ambiguity. There is no sense, a space that makes no sense to individuals or population groups like him. Economic instability. For South Asian migrants, precarity manifests not just in statelessness, but in economic exploitation as well. Low-wage labor markets offer little security, trapping migrants in cycles of poverty, debt, and employer abuse. Now, we see that in Kiran Desai's The Inheritance of Laws, there is a character, Biju, who who is again an undocumented migrant and who has stayed on expired visa, and he is not in possession of proper documents that actually acknowledges or permits him to reside in the United States, and but he still continues to live, and hence he cannot fight for his rights even when his employers, an Indian family, abuses him, and he, along with several other undocumented people of undocumented status, remain trapped in a basement where without any proper accommodation, without any proper access to resources. Also, Sanjeev Sahota's similar is the case with The Year of the Runaways, where we see this exploitation of the undocumented migrants uh, who work in the construction sector in UK, and they are exploited. They live in overcrowded, unhygienic conditions, and the only fear that they have is of deportation. There is this perpetual fear of being deported to and losing out on the income that they have. And since they are without any rights, they cannot fight for their rights. They are often exploited, and they cannot even demand fair wages from their employers. And their employers are very much aware of this predicament, of this situation. And therefore, these undocumented migrants or undocumented workers are always seen as disposable labor by nation states. They are, of course, needed for economic growth for the host nation, but their stability or dignity or recognition or rights are absolutely denied. Marginalization or migrant as the other. So, even when migrants secure legal status or employment, even then they continue to face hostility from host societies. And it could be racism, it could be xenophobia or political scapegoating, and they never fully belong in a way to the host society. Precarity, the South Asian narratives, they don't just portray precarity as as an economic deprivation. It's more about power, it's more about privilege. Marginalized groups like the people who are displaced, they remain trapped because the system is anyway designed to exclude them. So the exclusion exists no matter what. Even in Deepak Unnikrishnan's Temporary People, where we see migrants in the Middle East, their existence is all the more precarious because no matter it is their policy that no matter these migrants will always be temporary. Their jobs are not permanent. Uh, and these workers who belong to India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, they arrive in the Gulf as temporary workers and fully aware of the fact that there is no way that they would achieve citizenship, regardless of how many years they are laboring there. And Also, the sponsorship system or the kafala system makes their existence all the more precarious. There is a term used by Unikrishnan called human. This term is human scaffolding, which means that these workers are essential for economic growth of the nation state, but they are always disposable. They are completely, at the mercy of the nation state. And one and largely these workers are employed in the construction sector, and we see that there's on one instance when one character meets with death, it is not even recognized. There is no grief, there is no media reports, nothing. So the migrant laborers are over here in this context are not just dehumanized, but they are simply denied any kind of acknowledgement. Their existence is not acknowledged, absolutely, and they are simply discarded like a waste product. You know, so both and yesterday we had talked about guy standings, how guy standing conceptualizes the term precariat, and where he says that precariat, the class is defined by insecurities, low wages, and lack of basic rights, fundamental rights. And both Undi Krishnan as well as Sanjeev Sahota illustrate how these migrant workers are trapped in cycles of economic exploitation, unable to secure stability in their life, economic stability in their life, or even uh, unable to, exercise their fundamental human rights. But however, Unikrishnan just doesn't stop at depicting precarity as only economic. It is also again a legal thing, a legal issue. Uh, because without rights, without documentation, the displaced individuals are always under a threat of deportation. And this is one legal gray area for for temporary migrant workers, not just in the Middle East, but everywhere. They can be deported at any given time. They And here in this case, the nation state laws do not only protect the citizens, they do not protect the migrants, but these laws again actively they reinforce their exclusion, their disposability. Even both people critiques how asylum policies of the developed nation states criminalizes the people who are seeking refuge, who are fleeing from a dangerous situation in their homelands. Uh, However, safety is not an issue over here. It is because safety becomes a seeking safety is a bureaucratic, it's a very complex bureaucratic process in case of the displaced individuals or population groups. Legal precarity ensures that these displaced individuals remain permanently vulnerable and are treated as outsiders even after even if they have resided in the host nation for years. Migrants, in as we see in both the temporary people as well as the boat people, experience state sanctioned precarity, where legal systems exist not to protect them but to enforce that they are excluded. Once their labor is extracted, they are excluded from the recognition, from the mainstream recognition of the nation states. Now, since we are talking about displacement, and yes, I had started with the contemporary novels. However, it is crucial that we also look into the novels that have depicted partition or the aftermath of partition and how displacement and precarity had been depicted in those novels. And I have chosen only four here, that is Manto's, Sidwa, Ghosh, and Jyotirmoy Devi's The River Churning. Now, I'm sure we all are quite familiar with the first three, uh, but it is Jyotirmoy Devi's The River Churning, or the actual novel is a Bengali novel, and it's called Epar Ganga Opar Ganga, and it was translated in by Inakshi Chatterjee and was published in 1968. Um, so in Okay, but before going into Jyotirmoy Devi's The River Churning, let's just briefly glide through Manto and Sidwa as well as Ghosh. So Manto's Toba Singh, precarity here has been depicted as a psychological displacement. Now, it is one of the this craft of Manto's is one of the iconic allegories of partition. Uh, Precarity here is depicted through statelessness, the inability of the protagonist to belong to either country, the newly independent nations of India or Pakistan. And it symbolizes how these border zones can turn people into non citizens overnight, stripping them of their identity and as well as their legacies. Now, the mental asylum over here is a metaphor for the South Asia's political situation, where no one, the displaced communities, cannot make a sense of where they are living, where they belong, or which country they affiliate to. And these displaced individuals, just like the protagonist, they are also caught in that space, in that transient space, okay, embodying the disorientation and the identity crisis of the refugees, of the people who have been displaced by the partition. So displacement, as we were talking yesterday, it's not just physical, it is psychological and sometimes even existential. And it shows how the displacement, the forced displacement, fractures one's identity and it is irreparable. Also, Manto here highlights how a nation state has failed to protect its own citizens, its own people. Manto exposes how nations do not always serve the interests of the common people, the common folks, but instead prioritize rigid nationalistic divisions. Um, Refugees are not treated as human beings. Instead, their displacement is managed by cold bureaucratic exchanges, stripping them, of course, of their rights and dignity. Manto also critiques how newly independent nations fail to protect the rights of the displaced, instead institutionalizing their suffering. Bapsi Sidhwa also talks about partition through the lens of a child. And she depicts the gendered dimensions of displacement, and which would be reiterated even in Devi's The River Churning. Women had suffered double displacement, uh, and not just as refugees, but as victims of sexual violence and forced conversions. The real life fate of thousands of women during partition, many of whom were rejected by their own communities, even if they had survived rape or forced marriages. Sidhwa portrays women as bearing the heaviest burden of displacement, and they are treated women are treated as symbols of national honor, and their bodies became the contested spaces between these warring factions. Sidhwa further highlights how displacement does not, of course, always means physical migration. It means emotionally as well as socially excluded from one's own homeland as well. In Shadow Lines, Ghosh does not directly focus on partition and its violence. However, he uh, actually depicts the borders as some kind of psychological constructs, because he focuses on the aftermath of partition, how people who have survived the partition, how they have processed that violence in their memories and how they have constructed their realities thereby. And Ghosh critiques how nationalist narratives rewrite history, treating partition as an event of the past, when in reality it actually scars generations of humans and continue to shape their displacement and their struggles. And and this is the reality even today. So Manto and Sidhwa focuses they focus on the immediate displacement, be it physical or social or psychological, of displacement that had happened during partition with wreaking violence, whereas Ghosh explores the long-term effect of such a violent phenomena on and how it impacted the emotional as well as the psychological predicament of a generation that was growing up in the years following the partition, and how it also relegated them to a certain sphere of precarity, even though they are not the first hand witness of the violence. Now, the fourth novel that I want to discuss here is Jyotirmay Devi's The River Churning. Um, Jyotirmay Devi's River Churning is a seminal novel that explores the precarity of the displaced women in the aftermath of the partition and through the intersections of gender, caste, displacement in post partition India. The focus here is not on the political negotiations or communal violence or even generational trauma, but it is on how on during in the aftermath of displacement, women, especially women who were abducted, how they became stateless in their own nation state. The protagonist, Sutara, who is a Hindu girl, was abducted during the partition and was raised in a very friendly Muslim household. Even after she was rescued and brought back to her extended family because she had lost her parents and her sibling, she was brought back to her extended family, her Hindu relatives. She was not welcomed back. Her identity as a pure Hindu woman had already been tarnished because she was raised in a Muslim household for a few years. So her identity was permanently tainted by society. She was not in she was not able to understand why she was not welcomed with open arms, but it is the society, it is the nation state which has decided that how a woman who has been rescued from violence can again be relegated to a precarious condition by uh, by just denying her the identity of a human. Sutara is considered neither Hindu nor Muslim, exposing the social and legal precarity of abducted women in post partition Indian nation state. Partition was what Devi tries to depict is that partition was not just a territorial division, it created permanent refugees who had no identity, who had no recognition, no acknowledgement even in their within their own communities, and it's the women especially. Now here I would quote Urvashi Butalia from her The Other Side of Silence, and she says that women were not merely displaced by partition, they were erased from the national narratives. Their suffering deemed private rather than political. Unquote. So, and this is the sentiment that is echoed by Jyotirmay Devi as well. When she is depicting Sutara, I mean, just one case of the several of the abducted women who were silenced in the histories of both the newly independent nation states. Sutara's displacement, forced displacement, as well as the precarious condition, is further compounded by her uh, gender. Her abduction is not just an individual trauma, but is a collective, it's considered a collective dishonor. She is placed in a precarious position, rescued though, but still an outsider. And the nation state doesn't seem that she is fit, she's deemed and she is actually deemed unfit for any kind of rehabilitation. Now discussing we have broached this topic yesterday, but today we will delve a bit elaborately into this, that how literary techniques in the South Asian narratives actually depict this precarity that is induced through displacement and the traumatic impact of the process. Now, non-linear storytelling, that is, non-linear storytelling disrupts. What is non-linear storytelling? It is actually when there is an absence of a linear chronological element in the narrative. Non-linear storytelling disrupts the chronological order, mirroring the fragmented experiences of migrants who live in a state of temporal and spatial dislocation. This technique is particularly effective in the narratives of trauma, memory, and exile, where past and present are inseparable in nature. Now, Arundhati Roy's The Ministry of Utmost Happiness, and even Jyotirmoy Devi's The River Churning, they span over decades. Okay, in Arundhati Roy's narrative, we see that it moves across, the narrative moves across from 1950s to the 2000s without any clear demarcation of a chronological structure. Similarly, even in Devi's narrative, we see that through flashbacks, and Sutara is once portrayed in present, in post violence era, as well as she harks when she retrospects. In her retrospection, she goes back into that violence which she had witnessed. uh, the character Anjum in uh, Roy's narrative revisits her past memories as she constructs uh, them through a personal history. On often, this personal history of hers is entwined with national history as well. And this non-linear structure reflects how trauma disrupts the temporal framework. Okay, past wounds never actually heal, and that is what again leads to a certain sense of precariousness, that they keep on returning unexpectedly in unexpected situations. Non-linear narratives reflect the way trauma distorts time, forcing characters to relive their suffering rather than move ahead of it, move beyond it. Kathy Karath, in her unclaimed experiences, had uh, stated, and I quote her: trauma is not experienced in the moment, but returns insistently and repeatedly in the form of memory. The next technique we I would mention here is the polyphonic voices, or the multiple perspectives on on displacement. Polyphony refers to multiple voices narrating the story. Displacement, precarity, or even the grief, the traumatic impact, they cannot be singular or universal. They cannot be generalized. It's not a singular aspect. Uh, I'm sorry, Princey. Did you post a question? Okay, I'll take the questions. I'll have a few minutes towards the end, and then I can take the questions. Okay. So, as I was saying, so polyphonic perspectives means multiple perspectives. That means a story, that the experiences of displacement, precarity can be narrated from several perspectives. It need not be a very singular, a very linear, or a universal experience. Okay. And these understandings of displacement, since there are unique multiple experiences, so the understanding is also multi-layered. Um, and these authors, the South Asian authors, have incorporated multiple voices to depict the singular phenomenon of displacement, or even precarity. For example, Megha Majumdar's in her Burning, Jivan, the protagonist, she represents legal precarity and injustice in the face of state-sponsored violence. There is another character called okay, the trauma. Okay, the Kathy Karat's quote. Okay, so I will, since there's a question posted, I would once again read through the quotation. Kathy Karat's quote, open quotes, trauma is not experienced in the moment, but returns, comma, insistently and repeatedly in the form of memory, unquote. I will give all these quotations and the references that I am using, even the names of the primary texts, as well as the other secondary resources and everything. Towards the end, I'll prepare a slide on the maybe the second last or the last day of this FDP, and I'll prepare a few slides containing all these details, the quotations and everything, and I'll also give you the names of the essays. I remember yesterday also some people have asked about Judith Butler's books and essays. Everything would be provided. Don't worry about it. Let's discuss and let's have a dialogue on the same right now. Okay. All right. So even in both people, we see that Mahinder is not just the, of course, he's a protagonist, but he's not just the only voice among the ones who are seeking safety, who are seeking a safe harbor. There is another character called Priya, who is a Tamil Canadian lawyer who is navigating her dual identity. And what happens is that this structure of having multiple voices within the same narrative, it humanizes the migrant predicament. Because even within the experiences of displacement, even within the experiences of precarity, each displaced individual, each migrant would have their own unique experience. We cannot, as I said, and I'm repeating once again, we cannot universalize unlike Western frameworks, Western knowledge system, we cannot universalize the this violence of displacement, the abuses that the displaced individuals encounter, because every experience is unique in its own way. It's not polyphonic narratives capture this complexity from multiple angles. It's just like a panoramic view. It gives you a panoramic view of what kind of experiences each and every migrant or each and every displaced individual is experiencing. And I would also mention Mohsen Hamid's Exit West in this category, because even in Exit West there are multiple, even though we see it from the perspective of the young couple, but there are several other perspectives given on the same concept or the same phenomenon of displacement. The third is intertextuality, that is referencing through history and socio-political and historical narratives. So intertextuality refers to the way narratives echo or engage with other socio-political, literary, as well as historical narratives in order to enrich its meaning. Intertextuality connects individual experiences to broader historical patterns of displacement. For example, in Arundhati Roy's The Ministry of Utmost Happiness, she refers to the Gujarat pogrom of 2002, the Kashmir conflicts, as well as the India's caste politics, which makes her novel, which makes her narrative, both a personal story as well as a political document. Sharon Bala's Boat People, that is inspired by real life incidents. Okay, there was an MV cargo ship, MV Sun, which had arrived in British Columbia in 2010 with 490 Tamilians from Sri Lanka who were trying to escape the civil war, which was there, ongoing there, and they were detained by the Canadian authorities. Bala weaves the historical a crisis that is encountered by the refugees in her novel, connecting the Sri Lankan Civil War with Canada's historical mistreatment of asylum seekers, referring to the Komagata Maru incident of 1914. Migrant narratives are never, South Asian migrant narratives are never really isolated stories. They are always connected, and especially to the global histories and economies of displacement. Um, Migration narratives constantly dialogue with the past histories of colonialism, war, and forced exile. Uh, just to intervene a little. Yes, Aparna, I will share the slides. I will prepare the slides of all the 6 days and I'll share it with the organizer, and you will get it. Don't worry about it. And these slides are still would require some revisiting from my end. So I'll do that, and I'll share the final one on towards the end of this series. Okay. Shifting the next one, the next element, the next aspect of these narrative is shifting perspectives. Shifting perspectives highlight how migration alters identities over time. Migrants are constantly negotiating between who they were, who they are, and who they are becoming. And that is something that Sahota portrays when he depicts these Indian migrants in the UK who try to reinvent themselves in the host society. Nevertheless, they are tied. They are constantly tied with their past struggles, and there is a each character undergoes a shifting relationship in their own story of displacement. What felt like an escape when they had escaped now seems more like an exile. So, yes, so migration doesn't offer a stable identity, and these narratives depict that profoundly. It forces a constant negotiation between the past and the present selves. And the last one would be interwoven temporalities. Now, migration, as we have discussed, it disrupts the linear flow of time. Memories of home coexist with the present reality of exile, and the future often remains uncertain. And that is again, for instance, again in both people, refugees constantly, the asylum seekers, they constantly revisit the past, even though they had escaped the homeland, which is where there is a violent warfare going on, where people are being killed. But still, even though they had escaped, they have reached the shores of another nation state. They still revisit the past through memory, through interrogations, showing that how displacement often keep their people, the displaced, suspended between different timelines. For displaced people, past, present are never separate. Their trauma exists across time. Now, before concluding, what I would one aspect that I would really like to mention once again is that yesterday we had broached this topic of what it means to be human, and through these analysis of the narrative, South Asian narratives, we see that one thing that all these narratives, all these authors are trying to question or interrogate is what the notion of being human, what it means to be human within an existential crisis, and how humanity is forged not by people who are in a position of power, in a position of privilege, but by the people who are already relegated into to the peripheries, who are already in a very precarious dome. And this is something that is constantly the notion of the human and humanity being denied, being disrespected. These are the the perpetual aspects of discussion in all these South Asian narratives. Now, that was all from my side for today.